This Choircast podcast is brought to you by Inking Christ, a theological approach to tattoos by Dr. Justin Scoggins. This book is an invitation to view tattoos not as marks of rebellion or mere decoration, but as sacred symbols that narrate the story of one's faith and life journey. Dr. Scoggins' aim is to inspire believers to embrace the artistry of tattoos as a legitimate and meaningful form of worship, reflecting the beauty and love of Christ in a unique and personal manner. Pick it up today on Amazon.
Welcome to the Unbelief Podcast, your journey, actually our journey together beyond inherited beliefs to a spirituality that works for you. I'm your host, Jeremy. I'm a deep skeptic, also a pastor. We can fix that later, right? No? It's another book club episode of the Unbelief Podcast. Today, the 10 Commandments. This is sort of going to be the culmination of our exploration of the story of the Exodus from the beginning of the book of Exodus all the way through this giving of the 10 Commandments. It's a story of everything being hard and difficult, and then a little bit more hard and difficult as the people come out of this season of oppression. And so they get out of the season of oppression. They were being victims of this sort of corrupt nation, these corrupt rulers, and now they come out. Things are still hard, but in a different way as they are becoming the people of God, and as they are learning what it means to be their own people group, their own nation, and all the way up until this point where they get laws from God. Exodus chapter 20. Here we go. The 10 Commandments. So the 10 Commandments are often called the 10 words. They're not literally 10 words, but they're 10 utterances, 10 ideas. Even though in the actual original text, in the Commandments 6, 7, and 8 are able to be written with only 2 words each. And yet, as I say, Commandments 6, 7, and 8, there's a difference in different traditions. There's a Judaism numbering for the 10 Commandments, a Catholic numbering, and an Orthodox numbering. That is obviously something you can look up, but I'll give you the basic gist of it. In Judaism, they say the first commandment is, I am the Lord your God. And the Catholics say, I'm the Lord your God, no other gods before me. The Orthodox just say, no other gods before me. And so that you see right there at the beginning, it changes, because when you go to the second commandment, Judaism is sort of lagging behind in the numbering, right? No other gods before me, no idols happens there. Whereas no other gods was the first commandment for Catholicism and Orthodoxy. And then do not take the Lord's name in vain is the second commandment for Catholicism. But the second one in Orthodoxy is no graven images or no idols. The third one for Jews are don't take the Lord's name in vain. The third one for Catholics is keep the Sabbath holy, but the Orthodox say, no, we're going back here, and we're sort of paralleling the Jewish numbering here. They go back to the Lord's name in vain, and they follow the Jewish ordering all the way down to the bottom, and the Catholic numbering sort of lags one commandment behind all the way down until the bottom, whereas the 10th commandment for Judaism is do not covet your house, your wife, etc. The Catholics split that into 2, and they say commandment number 9 is do not covet your neighbor's wife. Do not covet your neighbor's goods, like the house and that kind of thing. And so Protestants, people who are not in the Catholic or the Orthodox tradition, normally follow basically the Orthodox order, but there's so many different Protestant, non-Catholic, and Orthodox groups. It's difficult to kind of group them all together. And, I think this is an interesting thing just because the way that they are broken down is not native to the text itself, right? It's not like the text says commandment number 1, commandment number 2, right? No, it's 10 words, right? 10 utterances, 10 ideas. In fact, at the beginning, it doesn't say these are the 10 commandments. The very beginning of Exodus chapter 20, verse 1, it says, "Then God spoke all these words," right? All of these utterances, all of these ideas. And that's really, really fascinating. We're going to dive into each one of these, and then we're going to look at some sort of higher level things that sort of look at all the 10 commandments together. And so let's just sort of dive in. I should say one other thing before we get there is that these commandments, right? It says you shall not make for yourself an idol, for example. In English, it can be a little confusing because in English, second person singular and second person plural are the same word. It's the word you, right? So you can't always tell in an English translation whether or not, if it's sort of using proper English grammar, whether or not it's a first person singular or second person singular or second person plural. Because, Bible translations will generally not say y'all or yuns. And so it is important to note that these commandments, that distinction will make a difference here, right? Because are these commandments being addressed to the whole group, all of the people, or are these commandments being addressed to each person individually? Is it that all of you people, all of y'all, need to not do these things? Or is it you need to not do these things? And these words, these 10 commandments are written in second person singular. That's important because I think a lot of times people it's easy to opt yourself out of responsibility by sort of saying, oh, this is to everybody. I'm doing a pretty good job, right? These aren't commandments. These laws it's like the nation's laws, right? If you say, no, this is directed towards me, I have all of the responsibility because it's not for other people. I'm not being asked to monitor other people. I'm not being asked to decide whether or not another person is doing this correctly. I'm not being asked to sort of think of this in these global terms. These commandments, these words are written to me and you individually. What it's saying is that God was saying these things to you. So don't look at other people. Don't try to figure out if somebody else is. No. That's not the point of these. It's you. And that's really helpful. Like, it's really helpful in life, right? Because often in our lives, we get caught up. We get caught up in all of these different, caught up in not focusing on ourselves, but focusing on other people, right? Not like, what do I need to do better? But paying attention, saying, oh, that person's off the mark, right? They're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. Yeah. That shift in perspective is a game changer. Because if I'm focusing on me, right? If I'm focusing on me, I become the best version of myself. I keep improving. But if I start focusing on everybody else, not only is it annoying, not only does it sort of separate you from other people, but it short circuits your own development, right? When your time is being spent trying to figure out if somebody else is in the right or in the wrong, that's time that you're not spending on figuring out whether you are in the right or in the wrong, on improving your personal life, becoming the best version of yourself. Yeah. This is a brilliant little nuance to these commandments. Even though they are ultimately being given to everybody, they're being communicated to each person individually. Okay. So, it begins with, I'm the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. Now, this is interesting because it is not saying that there are not any other gods. In fact, it seems to be implying that other gods exist. And we've talked about this in other places, right? What it says here is that you shouldn't have any other gods above me. Like, I am your God. These other gods, don't worry about them. You focus on me, right? And then in verse 4, it says, you shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in heaven above, that is on the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Remember, the water under the earth is the realm of the dead. It is Sheol. And actually, if you look back to the book of Genesis, to the first chapter, and the 7 sort of realms that God creates, or there's 3 realms that God creates and then fills with the inhabitants of those realms. The 3 realms are the water, the earth, and the air. And so it's interesting when you put this in context, though. So God creates all those 3. So God is over all of those things, as well as all of the animals and all of that stuff. But when you put this in context, where it says, or right before this, you shall have no other gods before me, something interesting emerges. In the rest of the world at that time, there were gods of the earth. There were gods of the waters. There were gods of the heavens, right? And each of those realms sort of had one or more deities that was governing those realms. And so this is sort of a reiteration almost, or an expansion, or going a little bit deeper into the you shall have no other gods before me. Because what God is saying is like, I am the God of gods. Maybe there's a God of the earth. Maybe there's a God of the sea. Maybe there's a God of the, of the underworld, like whatever. Maybe there's these other gods, but I created all of that. I am the God of gods, right? I am over all of those gods. And that's a powerful thing to assert in this area that recognized multiple gods. It still is giving space for the multiple gods, but it's saying, no. But this God, our God, is the top dog, the one over everything. So that's verse 4. That's another commandment. And or that's the one that starts in verse 4. And And it goes on a little bit more. You shouldn't bow down to them or serve them, for I'm the Lord your God, I'm jealous. And it sort of goes further into that. Then in verse 7, it says, you shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not acquit anyone who misuses his name. Okay, so we've mentioned this before. There is a proper name for God in the Bible. It has 4 letters. It's called the Tetragrammaton. It's Yod, Ha, Vav, Ha. And if you, but the proper name of God was never to be uttered at all. And because it's like this idea that you could call God to action by using God's proper name. Instead, they would use the word Adonai, which is the word Lord, translates to Lord in English. And this is important because they Bible translations will let you know that even though the word they would say is Lord, that here, this instance of the word Lord is actually that tetragrammaton. And so it says, you shall not make wrongful use of the name of Lord. And it's the way they notate that is big capital L, little capital O, little capital R, little capital D. And that's what it says here. Both instances of Lord in this verse, this talking about not making wrongful use of the name of God. It is the proper name of God. Do not do that. And it's bigger than pronouncing it, although pronouncing it is the beginning, right? So don't actually say out loud the name of God, this proper name of God. Nobody could actually say it. The Bible scholars, the theoretical pronunciation of that is basically Yahweh. You may have heard that. But that's not something that was ever written. And so what is happening here is don't say that word, but don't say that word because using the proper name of God is like applying God's power or acting like I can invoke God to do what I want, right? Which that idea of invoking God to support you is deeper, right? So like making an oath and saying like saying the proper name of God, we're going to make this, I'm going to make this promise. You're sort of calling on God to back you up there. Or sort of the idea of trying to conjure God. But the other thing is, and I think the way that it's more applicable maybe today is to think of it as invoking God's name to support your specific view of life, the universe, everything else. That invoking God's name to support your view, especially when it's the opposite of God's view, right? That is another layer to this meaning. This idea that that you would say, well, the Bible says, or God says, or a biblical worldview is that you should support all of the leaders of your country because God put them there. No. A, that's not what the Bible says, like either explicitly or implicitly. B, that is your own personal opinion, and you're using God, the Bible, whatever, to support an idea that God, the Bible, etc., says is not right. Like when people use the Bible to support hatred, exclusion, all of those things, those are not supported. They're not this idea of God that we find in this text, or in the religion that comes from it. And so that is taking the Lord's name in vain as well. And I don't know if you've ever seen that, like on the news, like in the last 10 minutes, but that happens all the time. Okay. So that's that one. The next one is, it says, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord. You shall not do any work. You, your son, your daughter, your male or female slave, your livestock, or the alien that resides in your towns. For 6 days the Lord made the heaven and the earth, the sea, and all that's in them, but rested on the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated it. And oh man, if there is a commandment that is difficult to follow in the Western world, it's this one. So part of what happens here, though, what's happening here is a pushback against what was going on in Egypt. So if you remember, God's people there are slaves, and they're having to work. They're going to be working 7 days a week. In fact, in the ancient world, there were very few people that didn't need to work 7 days a week to provide all of the necessary things for their family. The only people that really would do that are the ruling class. But especially coming out of Egypt, coming out of slavery, it's pushing back against a bigger value. And that is that slaves, one of the many, many problems with slavery is that slaves are valued based on what they can produce. They're valued in the same way as a hammer is valued, as any tool is valued, right? How much work can this complete, or can this help me complete? And it is dehumanizing to define the value of human beings based on what they can accomplish. And in the Western world, that is very much the status quo. How successful you are, how much work you can do, how many things did you cross off of your to-do list last weekend, right? And we will judge ourselves based on those values, based on how much we can do. We are judging ourselves in the same way as you would judge a tool, a thing. We're judging ourselves in a way that devalues us. There's a guy, a rabbi, a brilliant rabbi named Abraham Joshua Heschel. He has this book called The Sabbath. And the Sabbath is, he talks about this exact command. And I just want to read you some of what he says about the Sabbath as a way of entering in and imagining what Sabbath really is about, right? This reorientation of values, right? Because I think really we need help. In fact, if you want to go right now, get the book, The Sabbath by Abraham Joshua Heschel. It may be the best thing that you do, right? The best thing that you can do. Here's something he says. He says that the Sabbath is not an occasion for diversion or frivolity, not a day to shoot fireworks or turn somersaults, but an opportunity to mend your tattered lives. And here's this beautiful phrase: to collect rather than dissipate time. Yeah, like we spend time in the rest of the week, but in the Sabbath, we take it back. We collect time. We don't accomplish things. Yeah. Sometimes, though, people will talk about the Sabbath in a way that, like, this is a time to go to church, a time to read the Bible. And you just go to church and read the Bible, and that's what you do. That's the Sabbath, right? But Abraham Joshua Heschel actually says, no. The Sabbath is not dedicated exclusively to spiritual goals. It's a day of the soul as well as the body. Comfort and pleasure are an integral part of Sabbath observance. Man, in his entirety, all his faculties must share its blessing, right? Taking a day off to just enjoy, to relax, to experience pleasure, right? Yeah. Another quote from Heschel is he's talking about rest and how extreme rest needs to be in order to truly be this sort of rejuvenating rest, right? That we need to. It is a gift, and we need to recharge in order to have the presence in the world that we need. Right here, here's another thing that he says when he's talking about that. He says, rest even from the thought of labor. Rest even from the thought of labor. Like, if your whole Sabbath is just spent planning the things for next week, that's not rest, right? That's also work. There's this story he tells. He says, a pious man once took a stroll in his vineyard on the Sabbath. He saw a breach in the fence and then determined to mend it when the Sabbath would be over. At the expiration of the Sabbath, he decided, since the thought of repairing the fence occurred to me on the Sabbath, I shall never repair it. Yeah. Like, I'm going to mark this place. I'm going to mark this moment where my rest was invaded by a task, even a thought of doing something, where my rest, my pleasure was interrupted by the work. Yeah. Here's this. I'm just going to give two more quotes. On the Sabbath, it is given us to share in the holiness that is in the heart of time. Even when the soul is seared, even when no prayer can come out of our tightened throats, the clean, silent rest of the Sabbath leads us to a realm of endless peace, or to the beginning of an awareness of what eternity means. Wow. Yeah. Promised two more quotes. That was one more. Here's the other. For the Sabbath is joy, holiness, and rest. Joy is part of this world. Holiness and rest are something of the world to come. You enjoy both this world and the next on Sabbath. I take all of that time in the middle of this to talk about Sabbath because Sabbath is one of the most helpful and healthy pieces of this whole commandment structure. Sabbath also, it operates as a hinge in the Ten Commandments. The beginning of the Ten Commandments are all about humanity's, each individual's relationship with God. Sabbath is both God and people, right? It's God and people. It's a gift from God. It's echoing who God is. It's a way that you worship God, and it's something that is there to as a gift to the people. So everything else after this is about shaping the covenant, the relationship, the community, and really, all of humanity. Like this, the rest of these are things that shape that, right? And it says, honor your father and mother. This is the only one with a promise, as my pastor said to me, trying to make sure that I did what my parents said, so that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not. And now, in the King James, it's thou shalt not kill. And this can be a problematic thing, because there are moments where killing is so broad, so categorical. Somebody can say, look, it says thou shalt not kill, and then God tells the people to kill other people. That's not what he says. He says to go and have military campaigns. That is, yes, killing, but this word is actually not kill. If you have a accurate translation, like the one that I'm reading from, the New Revised Standard Updated Edition, you'll see that it's not rendered, you shall not kill. It is, you shall not murder. Murder is something very different than killing, right? You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. These are all self-explanatory. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor, right? You shouldn't go to court and lie about something and try to do that. Then the last one is, you shall not covet your neighbor's house or your neighbor's wife, female slave, ox, donkey, anything that belongs to your neighbor, right? Covet is to try to possess something that belongs to someone else. That's what coveting is. That's not like wanting it, being interested in it, in the terms of another person, being attracted to somebody else's, wife, whatever. It is trying to possess that thing that belongs to somebody else, right? I don't just want it. I want to take it from you. I'm going to try to take that for me. That's what coveting is. And that's an important distinction there. Okay. That's the Ten Commandments. But that's not the only place the Ten Commandments appear. The Ten Commandments also appear in the book of Deuteronomy. And in the book of Deuteronomy, you find the Ten Commandments again. And but they're slightly different. And this is an important little nuance to say, right? When these commandments were transmitted, they weren't transmitted in some sort of never-to-be-changed form, right? The Ten Commandments were like all of the rest, right? They weren't held in some sort of written legal statute. It was like the rest of the Bible. And though it's an important part, we're going to explain why in just a second, it's not that these are something that can never be altered or nuance added, shifted, that kind of thing. You see that in Deuteronomy chapter 5. We're not talking about Deuteronomy right now. You're welcome to go read it. Deuteronomy chapter 5. But the thing that is interesting here is that this and the covenant that comes from this, is shaped around this, is a type of covenant that we know. So there's different kinds of covenants in the ancient world. There's like formats for contracts, basically. And there's different formats. There's different patterns based on what it's governing and who's entering into the relationship together. Are they peers? Are they not peers? This is a type called a suzerain vassal treaty, a suzerain vassal treaty. And in that format, you have, there are lengthy, these are lengthy contracts in general. And they're between a higher status person, like say a king, and a lower status person, like an average citizen, or maybe even a slave, right? And the idea with these covenants, these contracts or treaties, is that it is assumed that the highest status person will do whatever it is they said they were going to do, because it's normally like, I'll give you some money, I will give you property, whatever, right? It's assumed that that's going to happen, that they're going to fulfill their part of the deal. However, it is, though it's assumed, so it's assumed to do that, but the lower status person, they are the ones that have to pay it back or fulfill their part of it. And so they have lots and lots of rules. And that's what happens here. There is a long covenant document, right, with all of the rules, all of the laws that you can remember, think of, imagine, really. And the problem with those long treaties is that it's hard to remember, and it's hard to like take with you, make sure you're doing all the things. So those treaties would also have a shorter summary document that sort of was the overview for the rest of the contract. And that's what the Ten Commandments are. The Ten Commandments are sort of a summary of all of what is going to be spelled out in sometimes excruciating detail in the future. These are the categories. These are the biggest ideas. And that can also be really helpful if you ever end up looking at the law, right? You can look at a law and say, okay, which category does this fit in? Because it can help you narrow the scope of what it's saying. And so if it's talking about, if it feels like it's a coveting law, then it's not talking about murder or stealing, right? So that's a really helpful little piece of information about these, what's going on with the Ten Commandments. And I think this is also helpful because it sort of empowers you and I in our spirituality to say, okay, I'm not going to get obsessed about the details of what I need to do and who I need to be. I'm going to focus on the big things. I'm going to shoot for being an honest person, right? In general. I'm not going to try to get sort of in the weeds of exactly what does honesty mean, right? What about in this random situation where my partner is asking me whether or not their outfit makes them look fat or whatever? Like, no, I'm not going to get in the weeds. I'm just going to try to be an honest person. And in each moment, I'm going to try to be that person, right? And if I try to be that person, that's the best way to shoot for being the best version of myself, right? That's the best way to try to get to that space. However, it's also the best way to decide when you've gotten off track Because instead of looking at each individual thing, you say like, no. Am I being an honest person in general? Like when I think of myself, do I feel like honesty is a hallmark of me? Or not did I randomly break the Sabbath? Did I randomly do some work? But am I actually a person who is valuing time off? Am I taking care of myself in such a way that I'm able to really recharge so that I can fully show up in this world as the person that I want to be, right? Instead of like, well, does that count as the Sabbath or breaking this? Like, no. But let's get back to the Sabbath for just a minute. Because when you think of it, when you imagine trying to take 24 consecutive hours and actually rest, it seems impossible for a lot of people, especially in the Western world. But it is possible. But the only way you can do that is by doing what the Bible says, which is to prepare for the Sabbath. The only way you can actually take that time off is to say, okay, hang on. I don't like cooking. So can I find some like easy meal, like just prepare something ahead of time, have leftovers on that day? Yeah. Or maybe like cooking is your thing. And so you say, no, I'm not going to plan on leftovers, right? I'm going to really do something fun in the kitchen, right? Yeah. But you've got to prepare for it. If you don't want to have to do laundry, that's a chore for you. You got to do it beforehand. You've got to prepare for the Sabbath. And then now listen, later in the New Testament, Jesus says, look, man was not made for the Sabbath. The Sabbath was made for man. Like, don't obsess about it. Don't like make yourself feel guilty and shamed because you can't keep it all the time and it's not just right. Like you always mess up. No, don't do that. That's not what it's about. It's a gift. And if you can't enjoy the gift one day, just say, oh gosh, I really regret that today I couldn't enjoy that gift. But it's to be a gift, not a source of shame and guilt. The other thing that I think for a lot of people on the Sabbath, like people would gather together for worship because community is another way that we recharge. And we have this community called Not Church. Not Church, it's like church in that it's people being there for each other, hanging out, talking about random stuff like music that we like, but also talking about spirituality and our processing our own religious journeys and all of that stuff. It's like church, except that there's no judgment there. You can explore, you can talk about whatever it is, and just appreciate what the other people are about. I think you'd love this community, and if you're interested in that, you should totally check it out. You go to patreon.com/skepticpastor, patreon.com/skepticpastor. It's $3 a month because we're not going to ask you for 10% of your income. Instead, you just pay for what you get. If it doesn't work for you, just stop paying. As you're listening to this, if for the first time you feel like maybe I'm actually going to take some time off and really rest, maybe give us a high five for the podcast. The way you do that, 5 stars, wherever you find it, give us a positive rating, maybe even say something. Because we don't just appreciate it, it also helps us get discovered by new people. That's it. That's the podcast. Shout out to the Choir Network, to Patheos, to Matthew and Keith, who make everything happen. Now, get out of here. Go do something to make the world a better place. Okay? We'll see you next time.